That was my grand entrance. So, this is where I get excited, is because the more systemized your business is, the more you don't have to spend time in it. And if you're excited about doing all the fun stuff and the creating and the marketing and the clients and the people side of it, then this is the best way to do that, so that you can actually get out of that space and keep having the fun stuff and be in your flow. However, it's setting it up so that you can do that, and the best person to set it up that way is you, because two things. One is you've created what you call your brand or your culture or your values, and you want everyone else in the business to act in your business the same as you would. Who here would like to have the way they speak to their clients the same way as everyone else would speak to their clients? Who here uses virtual assistants? No one? Yeah? Oh, you are one. So if you were to have a virtual assistant, who here is looking at using virtual assistants of some level? Or even recruit anybody locally? Yeah? Yeah? Yeah. Okay. Because one of the most powerful things you can do is have people working for you, for example, that are bookkeepers, that are chasing people up for money, and they might be approaching people with completely different language, completely different way of asking for funds, or following up on a service that wasn't provided, not getting back with the same type of, they might even be that English isn't their first language, so it's not something that's really super easy for them to communicate. So a couple of things that I've done up over time, and this is a really cool thing to do with a couple of people, a couple of friends, or a couple of the people that you're working with. And it's to create this. Our 100-word list. Now with a 100-word list, what I do is I say, okay, you don't know me very well because I've just shown up here today. You might have heard a bit about me, or you might have read a bit, you might have heard a bit already, but if you could just say one word that you'd say, if I was to describe Sandra to someone else, what would that one word be? Focused? Systemized. Organized. Doesn't have to be right, just has to be a word that you think. Successful. Busy. Entrepreneur. Traveller. Open. Clearer. Upper. What was the last one? On this one? Fresh. Okay. So, if you were to write down one word that would describe your business, what would that be? Not you, your business. Caroline? So you're results focused. Yep. Results focused. Yep. Crystal?
One word that I relate to all the time is empower.
Yep. Teresa? Okay. What about you then? Describe you. One word. Who's got a word to describe Teresa? One word. Yell it. Thoughtful. What was that, Tim? Okay. Fabulous.
Organised.
Organised, yep.
Client focused.
Client focused. Awesome. What about for your business?
Self-empowerment.
Self-empowerment. And William?
Enlightening.
Enlightening. So it helps when you've got a few people around, but if you could go and do a bit of a brain dump of one's words of describing you, your business, what it does, its outcomes, and start going through so that what you end up with is a list of likely over 100 words, thank you, that are going to be all about your business being dynamic or outcome focused or results. And I look at how people could use to describe my business as well. So what happens then is you've got a list of 100 words that describe you and your business that you can say to the person that's doing the copy on your website, here's 100 words that describe me and my business if you're looking at how to put together some words. Or here's a list of 100 words that if we're putting together an email that you'd use to use those words. So in our property education business, we had like empowered and don't give them a fish, teach them how to fish. We even had little sayings in there as well, and we had, so it was much about empowerment, ownership, accountability, responsibility, awesome, fantastic. We had some really, and then we had like credible, respectful, things that described how we wanted to be in there. So rather than go through and doing all your values and doing all the, all the things that you can get bogged down with, just do a bit of a brain dump, and then you can replicate those words all the way through. And then when you've got people that come on that are virtual, or people that come on that are part-time, or people that come on that are full-time, you can say, this is what describes us, and this is how we've described ourselves and how other people have described us. This is what describes us, the service we provide as well. And what we want to do is we want to keep using these words, and we put them up around the office or around your room. And when you're on the phone, you're looking at it all the time as well. So you're starting to use, yes, I'm really mindful of that, and oh, this is really awesome, thank you for that, I hope you're feeling empowered. Has that helped you? Is that enabling you to? So you start using those words in your language every day, and it starts becoming a brand. But it's all come from even something that's a natural thing for you to use, you're suddenly turning it into something that's a deliberate thing to use, and you're turning it into something that is an intentional thing to keep aligned, so that when people get a feel for going into McDonald's, the same feelings, the same stores in every place. So they go into a McDonald's in Bali, or a McDonald's in China, or a McDonald's in America, or a McDonald's in Australia or UK, they get the same menu, the same colours, the same experience, because they've created a system. And the food is questionable, but they are one of the most successful businesses in the globe. And they're based on a system, a replicable system. And they have 14-year-olds that operate these systems day in, day out, and they run their multi-billion-dollar company, but with 14 and 16-year-olds. And how they do it is they have checklists, and they tick them off. And they look at it, and they review, and they assess, and they see what's working and what's not after every single period of time. And I've mentored McDonald's. I know how they do it. And it's not the food that gets some people over the line, it's the experience that people have. They know that it's going to be fast. They know it's going to be hot. They know it's going to be quick. They know it's not going to be nutritious. They know that. They still come in with the same expectations, and they're met. So, what systems are you going to create in your business that anyone can come in and operate it as if you weren't showing up every day? So many years ago, I started at the age of 16 working in a bank. It was a small country town, and there weren't many opportunities at 16. My parents couldn't afford to send me away to boarding school. And I hadn't really done that well at school. I wasn't really a great student and didn't like being there. I didn't like other people, mostly. And didn't like my teachers telling me what to do. Didn't hear about the Lord's status at that point. And one of the things that I really found hard was actually moving to the country as well, because we had lived in the city. And my mum had been a single mum raising us, my sister and I, and she met a farmer and shipped us off to the farm out of town. We were 20 kilometres from town. There was no neighbours, they were like 5-6 kilometres away. We certainly didn't see anyone. We didn't have mobile phones or Facebook, and we weren't even allowed to use a telephone because you actually had to pay per minute. Yeah, and so I felt very isolated in a place where I didn't want to be, and I actually carried that attitude and that lack of taking ownership or responsibility right through every part of my life. And at the age of 16, I'd finished school. I had got a job as a hairdresser down in Perth, and I did 3 months there, and I didn't love it at all. This whole, talking with people all day and connecting up with, being creative, it just wasn't me, and I didn't even understand any of this stuff, obviously, then. So I decided that I'd quit when it came to the 3-month mark, and my mum said, you can't quit, you've got a job, I was living with some family friends in Perth, it's where you wanted to be. And I said, but I really hate the job, it's just not me. So she said, well, you can't go back to school. She said, they won't even probably take you. We can't afford to send you back to Perth. And she said, but there is a job going in the local bank. And she said, why don't you come up and apply for it? She said, it's a local job, it's a local town. And she said, you might be really lucky. She said, no one else might apply for it. So I came back up to country town, we're 2 hours out of Perth, and applied for the job. And I was really lucky, no one else did apply for it. And I did get the job. And I just had this reality check that this is it. This is what I'm going to be doing, something that I didn't really love doing. I'd really sucked at school and I'd really flunked out, and it was absolutely 100% my fault. And at this point, at the age of 16, I had this whole wake up that right now, where I was earning $97 a week, was not a space I wanted to be in. But I didn't know what I did want to do. I didn't know where I wanted to be or what I did want as an alternative. So I just started looking around me in our little branch, and I looked at the people that were at the front counter. And these people at the front counter were serving people all day and talking to people, and they got to balance off their cash till at the end of the night, whereas all I was doing was in the back office adding up all the checks and sorting them into account number order. So even for me, that wasn't exciting. So I started looking at what they were doing, and I started asking them, well, how long have you been doing this job, and what sort of things did you have to do to get from here to there? And without even realising, I was taking on mentors in a subconscious way of looking at where I wanted to be and connecting with those people and starting to model them as well. And they were great. We had some really cool people I worked with, and they showed and shared with me things like, we didn't have a uniform then, and they said, you've got to come dressed smart. You've got to start looking like you actually want the next job. Don't come looking like you're the junior at the back. Turn up for work like you want to be in the next space. And, we talk about be the person you want to be before you get there. Well, I didn't even think that was the case, and without even realising, I started to start looking like those people. I started talking like those people that I wanted to act like, and right through to the place that I got as high as I could. I became what's called a first teller, and that was like I was in charge of the other tellers at the counter, and I could do international checks. That was pretty cool. But I wasn't sorting through count numbers, and I started looking over and thinking, well, this is it. This is my payroll. I can't go any higher. For me to go to the next level, I actually had to have completed school, and I actually had to go back and study. So I started looking at how I could get around that. And in the bank, they actually do internal study. They actually have set up a pathway that you can actually connect up with as an external student to universities, and that's what I did. I actually went back, finished my HSC, and I started studying accounting, finance and commerce, and I started becoming a commercial lending officer. So in Western Australia, I was the first and ended up being the first female bank manager by just looking at everything else that other people were doing and going, well, that's where I want to be. Because I didn't create anything, I just started realising more that I was in the pain of where I wanted to be versus the actual clarity around where I needed to be. But what was really cool about that job is that over the years I actually did a few jobs and stints down in Perth as well. They ended up getting me to come to Perth, and they brought into place specifically trained agricultural consultants in the bank. And because my background was agriculture, I didn't really understand how to farm a crop, but they just thought because I was from the bush I had this overall understanding. I certainly understood farming financials. So they brought me to Perth to train all the agribusiness guys that came in out of university. And they'd come in with a degree, and they weren't coming in counting and sorting through checks and account numbers. They came in at a lending officer level, and they came in at a pay rate way higher than mine. And so then I started looking again. I'm thinking, well, how do I get this higher pay rate? Because that's what you're all measured on. How well you got paid was how well they thought you were. And the other thing that happened in that time was, as I was going through and doing relief work in different branches, I literally would turn up to the branch and I'd open up the drawer and I'd pull out the red tag key. I knew the red tag key opened up the blue cupboard, and I knew that this every bank had what we called a supplementary manual, and we called it our Bible. It had from A to Z every single thing that you could do and had to do, how to do an international check right through. And it was years later that I set up my own agricultural business that I started realising that I had to create my own Bible inside my business of the A to Z of how you can specifically do stuff that has got enough information that someone can come in and pick it up if I get sick or I can't turn up or I want to change jobs or do something else. So by the time I left the bank, I was really comfortable at looking at nearly anyone's financial plans, their budgets or their financials. I was there for 14 years, and I was able to go, well, this is where your costs are, and this is where, some big gaps. And I was able to do a pretty quick look at people's financial reports and see where the holes were and where the areas they needed to grow. I didn't realise that wasn't a normal thing that people could do, because I was dumb. I was told at school that I actually failed maths. And they all said, just don't go into anything that's going to actually require any mathematical requirement because, that's just ridiculous. And the second thing I did was I went on to set up a little agricultural business. My second child, Taylor, was coming along. I already had a 3-year-old, my son Brody. And my daughter Taylor was coming along. And I thought I wanted to stop working full-time and we had a little agricultural business as well, my husband and I. And I thought, what can I do? And I thought I could do a mobile bookkeeping or still in the country. And so I decided that I'd start up a little agricultural business, because one of the things that had happened over this period of time is we were a franchise. And the franchise we were for was for an agricultural mobile seed cleaning business. And this franchise, basically, they take farmers' harvested wheat and they run it through a mobile machine. We ran it through there. And it spits out the wheat and the weeds separately, because when it's harvested, it harvests the whole lot. And so when they plant the wheat the next year, it's just the wheat that's planted. It's not the wheat and the weeds. So one of the things we set up was this agricultural franchise that we bought, but we actually expanded it. We doubled the size and put on another guy. And this other guy was working like 300 kilometres away from where we were based. And this guy, we were leaving him on his own all the time, but he was able to pull out the franchise manuals and follow his way through, this broke down or this clunky noise happened, and we actually set up a little list of things he had to service every day and every week. And again, I kept going back to creating this in-house manual of how people do stuff on a daily, weekly or monthly basis, and we were able to operate a second machine for 5 months a year with only weekly contact, no mobile phones, weekly contact, physically driving up there with my little kids, making sure he was okay and stocking him up with chemical. But through that time, I decided that we were actually nominated as franchisees of the year. And it was really cool. I thought, we don't need to be award winners or we don't need to be putting ourselves out there. But one of the franchise guys said to us, you really should go for it. What you're doing is really spectacular. It's not just following the system, but it's actually multiplying it so that you're able to have someone else do what you're doing. You're able to have a bigger area. You're actually doing more per ton. You're actually more effective every hour. You're actually doing more volume and more profit than anyone else. And by we were nominated, and we became the state franchisees of the year for 3 years running, and then we became national franchisees of the year. And what that did was two things. Internally, it helped me make sure that we had a business plan, because you actually had to apply to be to win. So going through a process of being nominated is great, but then it's actually the process of applying for the actual award, which is really quite detailed and it deters a lot of people, but it helps you get really clear what your plan is. So that was really great to do and a great exercise, because I hadn't done a business plan for us. And number two was to get that what we were doing was other people were able to see what we were doing, and that added a bit of credibility to us as well. Because we were just young people that had grown up in the country. I'd worked in the bank and they'd seen me in the bank, but they didn't see me in any other role. And they didn't see me as a business owner, they saw me as an employee. So by having that credibility in the area, people were going, well, these guys must be doing something right. They've just won a national award. And there was a little bit of a write-up in the local paper. And this other guy, one of the farmers, came up and said to me, hey Sandra, you guys seem to be doing all right with that agricultural business. And I said, yeah, it's pretty good. And I said, but I'm looking at doing something else as well. I'm going to leave the bank. Maybe number two's on the way. And he said, well, we're bringing in some chemical from China. It's going to be competing with other big multinational companies. I wondered, you've got the chemical shed for your company. Are you able to put some chemical in there? And if farmers need to pick it up, they can just pick it up off you and you just do a bit of sales for us. I said, yeah, I can do that. And so we started storing. First off, there was only 3 products. And these products, the farmers had all gone to the same factories in China as the big multinationals were getting their things like Roundup that killed all the weeds, or it's like an insecticide that killed all the bugs or aphids in their crops. So farmers have to use chemicals, certainly through that era. There wasn't any organic farming, and you can't even just become an organic farmer. You have to have 3 years without, so it's just, so the farmers are there to make $1. They all use chemical, they all use fertilizer, and so what they were paying was these exorbitant prices. So what we did, and the group of farmers, is they got together and they went to the same factories that they were selling for 1 kilo, and a farmer would use 6 or 7 kilos of this one product a year. For 1 kilo, they were buying it for $1,200, the farmers, off the multinational companies, whereas we were able to bring it in, add a profit to it, add commission on it to sell it, and sell it for $200 a kilo. And so what it did was it just completely revolutionised what the farmers were paying in price on those 3 products. So our competitors, as soon as they realised what we were doing, 2 things they did. The first thing is we were selling a lot of it, because people were going, oh, these guys are the good guys, they're farmers, they're like us, they're trying to help us out. And they came and just bought it because it was cheap. But then the multinationals dropped their price, and they just tried to push us out of the market. So the second thing they did, because then we went out with this marketing campaign, and it was called 4 Farmers, because it was 4 farmers that got together that started this company. It was a few more, but they said it was 4, so it sort of threw off the competitors. And they got together and they bought the product in, and it was we're brotherhood. We're like you. We're just battlers. We're farmers. We're just trying to help, and it's only the price plus a bit of profit. Well, they then went and said that if you use their product, it will kill your crop. It won't just kill the weeds, it'll kill the whole crop. Or the insecticide's going to kill you. It's not been tested. We're buying it out of the same factory as they were. So then we had to go out, and these guys have got big bucks, whereas we've got a group of farmers that were literally mortgaging their farms to get this started. So we couldn't go out on price anymore, and then we had lack of credibility. And by this stage, I realised that it was probably a good opportunity here for me to run this little business rather than go bookkeeping, or something that was something a little bit more entrepreneurial. I could run it from home. Baby 2 had been born, Taylor, and I thought, okay, well, I can go and deliver some chemical and be here in the day, and get a little babysitter in as well. One of the little girls in town was pretty keen to come up and help me. So I decided that I'd set up this little business, and I bought in more stock. And all this was going on at the same time. And so I thought, how do we get out there and tell farmers that it is a good product? Because I think it's a good product. It's as good as the product they're using. So we started running trials. So I'd go to Caroline and say, Caroline, can we come and run a field day at your place? And we're just going to put a strip down the middle of your crop with just our product. We're going to peg it, and we're all going to come back in 2 weeks' time. And you know what? I'm going to put a few beers on at the end of the day as well. And while I'm there, and while I've got you and a beer in your hand, I'm going to tell you what we're doing, what else we're selling, and all this. So we started running the only field walks that had ever been done. I started hiring a little bus from the little community centre and started looking at how I could go through and actually set it up so that it wasn't just the product or just the price. Well, I had a vehicle pull in one day, about 2 weeks later, after this is all going through over in a few month period of time. And this vehicle, 2 guys hopped out, and they were wearing the moleskins with the like elastic-sided boots and these shirts, and they're, are you Sandra, Morrell? And I'm like, yes. And they said, well, we're here to shut you down. And I said, what do you mean shut me down? I just got a little shed on the side of the house, 3.5 acre block on the edge of town. And they said, yeah, we've implemented a trade sanction against you. I said, isn't that what one country does to another country, put into place trade sanctions? And they said, well, you're storing chemical in a chemical shed that's not accredited, you're selling it and you're not licensed. And they were completely correct. So they did put a trade sanction on me. I had to go and get my shed accredited. Should have done it in the first place. Didn't realise I had to. No excuse. And the other thing is I had a forklift that I paid $5,000 for. That was my big startup capital, $5,000 forklift. And I was driving it, and I'd been taught how to drive it by my husband, who's just like a front-end loader. And I didn't have a license to drive a forklift either, because I thought, well, it's on private property. Why do you need a license? But I needed a license. So it's making sure that you've got all your ducks lined up. Again, I didn't have a business plan. So I'm like, I've got to go back to the basics all the time. Every time I'd stepped out of having a business plan, it came and bit me. So I went and did one of these things. So I sat down and I wrote down, what are all the strengths in my business? Anyone heard of these SWOTs? Weaknesses, opportunities, and And by doing this, I realised that there was a lot of other stuff I hadn't done either. And there were some things I could do. So I started looking at one of the biggest weaknesses I had in the business was me. Physically, I was weak. My competitors were like Elders in Australia, people would know them, and West Farmers Landmark. And these guys were stocky guys. They'd go in there, and they were chemical managers. They'd lift up a 20-litre drum of chemical like it was as light as a feather. It weighs 20 kilos. They'd roll over a 200-litre chemical 44-gallon drum, and they'd roll it onto the back of the ute. I couldn't even tip it. We had 110-litre containers. I could tip them, but I couldn't do anything else with them. So physically, that was a big challenge for me. And the other side of it was that, well, what was I going to do about it? Because I had two girls working for me too. One was a bookkeeper. I brought her on just to do a couple of days a week while I went out and was delivering stuff. And also had another girl come on as a sales manager. And both the girls were wanting to work part-time, so I was able to grow my business really slowly. My product line was increasing. I was actually still getting stuff on consignment, but then I was starting to buy some stuff and negotiate some terms. And I was starting to grow, but these were the things. Every time I started doing a SWOT on my business, I did one every 3 months, my physical capabilities of it was restricting me. So what I did was I looked at what was the opportunity here, and I went down to Perth and I bought a little 3.5-ton high-ab truck with a little crane on it, and I started offering farmers that if they bought 1,000-litre containers off me, then I would not only deliver it exactly where they wanted in their paddock, but they could also, if they bought that as a minimum, I'd deliver all of their chemical, and on top of that, during our actual chemical season, which is seeding when they're really super busy and they work 24 hours, I would actually, because I lived at home and the chemical shed was right next to me, if they gave me notice, I would actually put chemical out and leave it out for them overnight so they could just come in and get it whenever. Or I'd even get up at 4 in the morning or 3 in the morning and open up the shed for them and let them take what they needed through that 6-week super busy period. No one else could do that. So I started looking at what was a weakness and how could I not just turn it into a strength, but something that was really different to what anyone else was doing. The other thing I started doing was really rewarding the guys that were actually buying their chemical from me, and we were doing more and more field tests and field trials, and I was giving them little soil sampling tests. But I still didn't know anything about chemical or anything about fertiliser. I started selling fertiliser as well. And the reason I started selling it was because people thought that I was already selling it, and they were asking me, are you selling fertiliser as well? Because that's what the Elders and the Landmark were doing. They were selling chemical and fertiliser. And I'd say, no, I'm only selling chemical. And they go, well, you should be selling fertiliser. And I'm like, I don't know anything about fertiliser. So I started looking around and looking at an aligned company that I could buy as a product that wasn't being used in the market in that area, and I started selling a fertiliser brand. So I had to look at how I could bring in knowledge, because I didn't have any. None. I didn't know the difference between superphosphate and monoammonium phosphate. So I started bringing in experts and running field days and field trips and doing getting them to write little newsletters, and there was no emails. I was getting them to fax it out, these little updates to everybody that had a fax. Not everyone even had a fax. And so it's about how you can bring in the knowledge, or bring in the expertise, or bring in the gaps, fill in the gaps all the time. And that's how I succeeded in my business, is I constantly filled in gaps. And the second thing that I did it was a real pain for me to send people off to Perth to get forklift licenses. We had to go down for 2 days. I had to give them one of my utes. They went down there. I had to put them on accommodation. It cost me about $2,000 to send everybody down there for 2 days to do their forklift ticket. So I decided that, given that the chemical shed is empty a lot of the time because it's seasonal, what I would do is start running forklift training courses in there. So I went to Perth and became Cert 4 trainer, and I started running forklift training courses for West Farmers and my competitors and Western Power, and started teaching people how to drive forklifts. And they came to me. There was a waiting list of people wanting to come, and it was a little bit off my business plan, but it was part of how I create a cash flow, because cash is king through times when it's tough. And so those companies like Western Power, the electrical companies, they weren't seasonal with the farms. They were just they had a budget and they had people coming through all the time. So I started looking at clients outside of this one pocket of clients that was so dependent on the rain. They could do everything 100% right, and it's just not rain, and it impacts how your business goes. So I kept coming back, kept doing my business plan, kept doing this, and my biggest thing came back to that I couldn't be everywhere at once. So how do I systemize my business? And one day I was really pulling my hair out. I had trained this awesome girl. She was fantastic, and she had a family emergency and she had to fly back over east, and she'd quit. She quit that day. I was so busy and we had so much going on, and I committed so much to my business, and I was tired, and I just burst into tears. I thought, I can't do this on my own. I can't train someone again. It just takes too much time and energy. So what I did is I actually came back and I sat down, and this is what I wrote out. These policies and procedures. I put into place a policy in my business that enabled me to get out of it and start doing what I did well, which is connecting up with people as far as sales, opportunities, filling in the gaps, and doing what I did well, looking at the numbers as well. But what happened was, as a result of me doing these systems, is that the fertilizer company wanted to buy my business. So they said to me, Sandra, we want you to do what you've just done in your business across our whole company, and we want you to do it. We've got 38 independently owned agencies. We want you to come in and systemize all of those agencies, and we've got 70 salespeople. We want you to do sales training with them, and we want you to come in and be our state manager. So I actually sold them the business. I moved to Perth and took on a consulting role with them, which set me up in 2006, 2007, going forward as a business consultant. So the first thing I always look at is, what are the rules? So people talk about policies in an organisation, but it's really just the rules. So if I wasn't there on a day, what happens when I'm not there? Is everything run the same as if it would be as if I was there? So I like to look at how I can literally have an organisation that is run as if it was the same as if I was in it. So I make sure I'm really clear what my rules are before I expect anyone to adhere to them. And then a procedure. So we've got policies and procedures. So procedures just as a breakdown of how you actually do something. So when our team travel, an Entrepreneurs Institute, and even in United Farmers, the fertilizer company I was manager of, they've got a fly economy. We didn't want any surprises of people saying, oh yeah, I upgraded myself to first class. Didn't think you'd mind. Thought I had a good week sales. We make sure that they follow especially with so many people out there driving, and we make sure that they adhere to all the road rules as well. And if they're staying in accommodation, that they get given an allowance of maybe it's $145 a night that they can spend up to a room. Maybe they can spend more than that, but it's just what it's specific. You have to be clear what that is. We always had that they could stay in any accommodation, but they would get given only $120 a night towards the accommodation. And the meals that they'd get an allowance of whatever the government code was, but it was about $17 a meal for an allowance. So they could go and have steak if they wanted to, or seafood, crayfish, but they'd only get $17 towards it. So these are the procedure on actually driving instructions on how to get to Vision Villas, literally like you would on a Navman or a Where Is find it, but step by step, turn left, 100 metres, turn right. Take the first left, 67 metres, take the first right, 190 metres. So it's like anybody can hop into that vehicle and literally drive it because they know exactly how they're turning. So what you want when you're looking at a procedure is how can I move Brenda out of her business and move her into Caroline's business, and you could walk in there and say, okay, that's the manual, alrighty, so that's where all the information is, that's how I log into your password, that's how I get into your computer, that's how I find help, this is how I answer the phone.
So the question I've got is how do you make a procedure with creativity? So my business is a creative business, so
Yep.
I can tell people which buttons to press on social media, but I can't tell them how to get creative with what they do.
I'll get you to use the microphone, yeah, sorry. But okay, give me an example.
So,
Outside of pressing a button, the creative bit.
so it,
Is it on?
What was the question again, sorry?
Give me an example of what you feel you can't write a procedure about.
So it's about understanding the copy. How can you make the copy creative? How can you make it so that people want to click on it? A lot of that is actually intuition, and then it's test and measure, but actually it doesn't. The same process doesn't work with every customer base.
Okay, so what you're looking at then, is it you that specifically writes a copy?
No, I've got a team that do that.
Okay, so what I would do is, for that example, I would have there that for any copy that's being required, first off it's got to be approved of what the outcome of the copy is going to be. Secondly, this is where we send it to. This is where we send it back to. These are email address, contact details. Then I'd have in there that what's, be very clear what the outcomes are, how we're going to review it, whether it's weekly. So it's not you type in, really engaging words. It's that what is this process around the outcome and the review and the contact details of the people you're sending it to. So we have obviously a very creative company as well, and different types of, so we have everything being approved because we actually use different copywriters, but we still want to make sure that it's got the same flavour or theme.
it's so timely.
Yes, yeah. So if you were to have, so we have different copywriters in different countries. So we still want to make sure that copy, because that copywriter, one is there's different spelling in different countries or different languages in some of ours. And the second one is you want it to be the flavour of that country so it doesn't sound very American in Australia, because that wouldn't work either. So we make sure that it still comes back to a central point. So even though everyone's getting their copy written as they feel was, the flow of what is the outcome, it still goes back to a central point. And it's checked, and it's proved, and it goes through a central platform before it's sent out.
You just could not do that on social media. It's too timely. It has to go out straight away.
Yeah. So then you'd have that your policy would be that, it still has to be signed off by someone, so there's no spelling mistakes, or you'd have to have some check in there. You'd have a quality control in there, wouldn't you?
Yeah, but you have to do that post. You can't do that before. You can't. Social media is so sorry.
See, this is Teresa and I have been trying to, because Teresa's my lord, by the way, along with my buddy, and a brilliant buddy and lord she is. I was actually looking at building an outsource centre in the Philippines.
Yeah.
But due to the fact that they need to be creative thinkers, that's not the right solution. And also it's the fact that social media has to have a response there and then, so it couldn't go through that, send it off to someone, they've got to read it, they've got to approve it and send it back. We just couldn't do that. So how can I systemise that?
A step before that is your recruiting process. It's making sure that in your recruiting process that they have demonstrated proven experience in responding on the spot, right through to that you can check that they are great, they've got good grammar, yeah, they're creative thinkers, but they're showing and demonstrating examples and samples of what they would do. So this is a policy example, and I didn't want to bog you down with this, but this is something that I just wanted to share with you. I'm going to give you a copy of these slides because it's really cool to be able to do it, because for me, this got me out of doing this all the time. It got me able to get back on the road and do all the things that I was really powerfully good at and was able to make a real difference to my business. But this is a procedure that I've written for my FPOS machine. Every time we ran an event, we'd pull the FPOS machine out and, we'd have crew, volunteers that were working the FPOS machine that never knew whether you pressed moto or pressed this. And So I typed this up, and I never had anyone do a single thing wrong. We had even had people that didn't even know how to turn it off, or we put in here to re-plug it back in between, all the sets so that it's only taken off the charger during the actual sales times. And so we were being able to write out a procedure was to use the FPOS machine, press OK to turn it on. So right through to how to turn it on and turn it off. The other thing I created was procedure guide for our admin. Like if we had people that don't write a procedure just for the sake of writing one. It's really about just if you have people that come into your business that are going to be answering the phone, or you have people that are going to be in your business doing accounts, so that what we've got, and I've set up in those Google documents with all of our accounts team, have the first tab is a procedure for that accounts receivable or accounts payable. So the procedure isn't in a manual nowadays, it's actually live in the working document. So they can go straight to it. It's got chart of accounts right in there so they can refer to it all the time. So they're not clicking between things, it's duplicable and it's right there. And this is something that I would encourage you all to do, is to write your company dictionary. So it's sort of like this. It's like it's 100-word unique about you and your business and how you can actually replicate what you do and consistently replicate it. But the dictionary is, we had a Wealth Dynamic Masters event here, and we're having one again in November. So it's for people that have a business that come in and we strip it all apart and we rebuild it over a 5-day period. You have Roger for 5 days and 3 other mentors, and we're constantly giving you feedback every way through it, and it's like speed dating mentoring. So you go to bar later. So Roger sits in the what, and I don't always sit up there because it gets a bit hot, but you come up to us and we're constantly giving you feedback, and you're constantly creating and building up this absolute rock solid business plan with the action steps by the time you leave on Friday. But what we had, and Kevin was at this training session, we had our Talent Dynamics sister company. They do Wealth Dynamics for corporates, and we had them talking about FCLHs and FCs, and we're all sitting there going, what's an FCLH? It's a flow consultant license holder. We're like, we don't know what that is, but they all knew, and they all had this little whole community of conversation around that was completely ostracizing everyone else. And many years ago in the bank, we weren't allowed to use any jargon at the bank counter. So we're at the counter, we weren't allowed to say, go and get the WOGON or the jargon or the whatever it was, the little acronym we'd made or created. We had to use the proper wording and names for everything. So it's getting really clear in your organisation, what are you creating that you're communicating that people are confused by? And if there are things that you have names, even things like we call it our dream team, which you'd be used to this language with Jan and Don. They're our dream team of our people that we go to for accountants or go to for bookkeepers that we would recommend other people to use. So they're probably people too that we would have a relationship with that's financial, that would be either exchanging referrals, or it would be, if it was a finance broker or insurance broker, and I'm recommending them, people go to them, they will give me something off the back end. Either it would be a referral or it would be a return commission. So Dream Team are only specific people that we would recommend to people. We don't just say, oh, my uncle's a bookkeeper. We use the words EOI, which is an expression of interest. So we created an internal dictionary for the company so that new team coming in could go through this and understand what we were rabbiting on about. And this is how I split everything into when I put into procedures, which is into marketing and sales, which are two different things. Finance, financial services is your products. We were financial services. Quality insurance, public relationships, which is your branding and marketing, to external like radio stations or PR. And executive, we always kept that one obviously locked when we're in a big organisation. So I had 65 staff when I set this up for the company that I was GM for, and they were, it was financial planning and financial broking, and it was different types of education that we were offering as well. So we made sure that all our contracts and everything were kept confidential. Alrighty, so who's excited still? Who thinks having some systems in their business would be able to help them? Yeah. So what I look at is a STAR model, and it's really around what's the situation that I want to have as an outcome. Like the situation is that by who has something that's one of the things that Caroline might find that by putting together copywriters, it's not the copywriting process, it's the recruitment of the copywriters that she's needing to write a process around. So the situation, the task is that she wants to make sure that there's a clear pathway of recruiting, that she's able to make sure that she's got these tests and measures and also ongoing training and also reviewing, so that they might have calls every second day or every week, depending on what your timeline is, to say, hey, we want you to raise up and share what didn't work this week or what came up for you, what were questions, so that you've got that constant feedback going back to the team as well. What's the action we're going to put into place to move forward, and what's the result that we want as well. So as I go into an organisation, many companies have said to me, Sandra, we just don't know where to start. We just don't know where to start. We've got a tyre power business that we sell tyres, and we've got 50 different brands of tyres. We've got 8 guys that are mechanics or tyre fitters. And where do we start writing a procedure? Our mechanics and our tyre fitters are not going to write a procedure. So what I do is, first off, is allocate and nominate one person that's going to be in the team that's going to own it. They're going to be the people that are going to be on the ground. They're going to be the checkers. And they're usually this person that's down here, the actual accumulator or Lord or mechanic person. Quite often mechanics really strong with this and checking back and forward. Or the accumulator as well. The accumulator can't always, they can't visualise the system or the process unless they've got it all mapped out in front of them. But the mechanic is more likely to be able to actually create the process and then actually put it into a system as well. So a mechanic, because they've got the visual part of that profile, is a really cool one to have when you're putting this together. So I get every team member to write out a list of every task that they do. This is if it's an existing business. Identify if it's daily, weekly, monthly or quarterly, how often they do that task. And then go, okay, set up one page for each one of those tasks. And I'll show you an example of this. And then I get them to list the task name at the top and detail step by step what they do. And then the most important thing is to get Brenda to go into Caroline's business and swap over and say, can you answer the phone as you would like to, as Caroline would. And then it's to make sure it's accessible. So we use Dropbox and BoxNet. Both of those are great to be able to have a platform that people can get onto. Like I said, for many of our daily processes that we do, we put them right into the Google Doc. So with something like that that's more of a timeline attached to it, what I would, and I'll just throw this in the mix and see if it's online with what you're saying. I'll ask you a question. What's the biggest challenge with if somebody else was to take it on tomorrow, what would be their biggest challenge with it?
It depends which part, but it's just getting the steps in the right order.
Mm-hmm.
The putting it together is not that hard. It's just there's a version for iPads, there's a different version for iPhone, then you have to put all the links into it, then you put other, back-end stuff, then you've got to get approval from Apple. So you don't necessarily do that in all one go, but so there's different bits you have to do that have to be in a specific order, but each bit has its own little block of procedures. So I need to not only map the overall, but somehow link. Do you see what I think? It gets, oh my God, what software do I use so that you could just click directly? So step 1 is make sure you've got all the copy, send it to the designers, right? Step 2 is then put it in the back end, and that has a separate procedure.
I'll show you the software I use.
Oh, this?
That's the software I use. Yeah. So that's where I start, with sticker notes. So I literally go, okay, what are the things that I've got? iPad, I've got website, I've got iPhone, And then I go, okay, what are the things I've got to do for each of them? And so I start putting every little thing I've got to do on a stick-it note, because then I can go and move it back around, or I can copy. The main thing you want to set up is a generic. So you've got, what's the flow? So what's the ideal timeline that you do it in, which order? We do newsletters as well, and so I always had on the 15th of the month I had to start writing it, and by the 20th I had to get it to my VA, and by the 20th my VA had until the 25th to get it all templated up and checked and add the pictures and have everything embedded right. And then I had to diarise that on the 25th or 6th I'd go in and check it, and then she would then submit it, like by the 28th or 29th she would actually send it out. So that was, in a way, it didn't say what content I was putting into it, but it sort of had that she had to, before she sent it out, she had to send it to 5 people in the team, and they all had to send it back. They had to click on every single link. Who's ever sent out a newsletter and the links didn't work? So, they're the sort of things, or the link goes to something that it shouldn't. So it's to make sure that every single thing works in it. And so what we did is we created a procedure for that, so that her contact details, when she had to send it back by, and a checklist that it was in, obviously it needs to be engaging, and those things that are the part that you're not writing a procedure for writing content, you're writing a procedure for putting into place, the outline of that role. So I had one of my team, she was writing up a procedure, and she'd forgot to put in there the main contact person's details. She said, well, they're just in Infusionsoft. We use Infusionsoft. And I'm like, no, I don't want to be going into Infusionsoft and looking for somebody's contact details. I want their contact details in that procedure that are just there, that I can, not me, but anyone look at it. So I want something super clear and easy. But it's got to be simple. We overcomplicate things too much, and we write procedures for things that we probably don't need. So whenever something happens that's a negative in my business, or any business I'm working with, I go, well, how can I pick it up and look at it and maybe look at how I could have done things better? What would I do again next time this came up? And what can I do to implement to stop this happening again?
Infusionsoft example is interesting, because then what happens is, what if your contact changes and who's responsible for thinking, I've got to now change the procedure details, because that's the other problem.
Yep, so you have one person that owns it, and maybe it's you, maybe it's not. And so what I found is that if it's in a project, like if you've got that project, then it's that. So if it's something that impacts how to book a trip to Mount Batur. Who climbed Mount Batur? Oh, Kristen. Group representative.
Yeah, we had that.
Were you awesome for everybody? So it might be that the procedure to climb Mount Batur is to get the forms out to everyone, get the times out, reminder emails. So it's writing an outline, but the contact would be the contact people that are going to pick us up. So they might change, and it's making sure that the person that's owning that is owning it and making sure they're updating it. And it's not kept on if you cannot keep it on a Word doc, stored away somewhere in the back blocks of your business, that's the best thing. That it's somewhere that's on a live document that's like a Google or cloud or something that everyone can see. And as soon as you change it, it doesn't have to get saved in everyone's computers, it's just instantly changed. Alright, so this is what I do. It's literally put together what the procedural policy is I want to change or make. And I start doing one task or one thing per sticky note. And it does look like this. Tim's, yours would probably look like this. And that's okay, because you're going, I don't even know what I've got to do the whole task. Because that's why ideally you work with a few people in the team as well. Because then what happens is we pull it back into some sort of a line and a bit of a breakdown of the details. And then from there, we end up with what we type up into an actual procedure.